Okay. All right. Well, welcome to the second episode of the Alley Report, um, which is part of the service department. Today I'm talking to writer and editor at Point of Impact Publishing, Joe Nelson. And yeah, so Joe, why don't you give a little intro?
Hello, world. So, my name is Joe Nelson. I started Point of Impact Publishing back in 2022 as a means to self-publish my own work under the pen name of RJ Calder. And since then, we have published 9 works of fiction. Um, 7 of them have been my own, and we've actually branched out and been able to start publishing other authors' works as well in the last year. So we publish predominantly action adventure fiction, what used to be called men's adventure fiction back in the 70s and 80s. And I'm probably going to be the only non-horror author attending ZervCon this year.
Yeah, it seems very horror heavy, but I don't know. I like that there's
Horror people are awesome.
yeah, but I like that there's an action publisher. Was that, and also I feel like I've seen authors, when they self-publish, they'll come up with their own publishing, but usually it's just for them. What made you want to be like, no, no, mine's going to be for real, and I'm going to have other authors brought in?
Well, it wasn't the intent originally, but I started out learning a lot of this very haphazardly. I went in without as much preparation as maybe I should have had, with more than some, less than others. And I experienced a small level of success, but through meeting other writers on social media, I'm very heavy on TwitX, whatever the heck it's being called these days. I got to meet an author, Reagan MacArthur, and his writing style was just too good. And he wrote a complete novella, shared it with me, and I said, it has to get out there. And that was one lash to kill. And so I'm like, okay, I guess I'm a for real publisher at this point. I had a contract written up, I paid him, and we are moving forward in that direction. And I hope going forward slowly to be able to do that with more authors down the way.
Yeah, well, I like that you're kind of like taking the slow approach and not going to do that supernova self-destruction that a lot of indie presses do.
Yeah, that happens very easily, and unfortunately, I've seen it happen so frequently. And I everything I have to do has to be a little bit measured because at this point we're still between the costs of advertising, my cover designer, paying at least one of the authors. Um, it doesn't quite make even, but it's not bad enough where it's like, oh, this is not viable and I want to keep it that way and find additional ways to grow. This year, we're going to try to branch out into audiobooks and see what that even means.
Yeah. Um, well, like doing, both author and editor running a press has how have you found that one's impacted the other? Has it altered the way you approach writing at all, like being behind the scenes more?
I don't know that it's altered the way I myself approach writing, but it definitely has an impact with how I perceive my interactions with other people and the the growth and what's the word I'm looking for? Because you're trying to, as an editor, one of the big things you're doing is trying to get an author to build on their strengths or what you perceive as their strengths,
Yeah.
versus you just kind of sitting in a bubble and writing away all on your own. But it hasn't really changed my outlook on writing. It's definitely changed my outlook on what I define as progress. It used to be I could write a book and be like, okay, it's done. Now I have to be like, okay, now there's a cover that needs to be designed. Okay, we need to start planning the ad campaign. We need to start looking at all of these other little facets and how it's going to fit in. So that's been a very educational and very exciting.
Okay, and what made you want to do get into like the action, like you mentioned, like the old school men's adventure magazines, which I kind of familiar with because a lot of like classic, cryptid, Bigfoot, Thunderbird stories, like they all of them go back to that. They originate from that era.
So when I was 14, I went through a summer vacation where all my friends were gone, and I was alone pretty much. But I got into my father's collection of paperback novels, and he was a big men's adventure series reader. So he had all of like the Executioner, the Destroyer, Nick Carter, the Killmaster, the Death Merchant, well, no, he didn't have the Butcher. That's a different story. But all of these different series, and so what I would do is I'd start reading an Executioner on Monday, all summer. An Executioner on Monday, finish that by Wednesday, start a Destroyer on Wednesday, finish that by Thursday night, Friday morning, start a Nick Carter Killmaster, then move on to another. And I spent the whole summer just reading his entire collection, and it was a very good way to escape into something very visceral and very, I mean, we didn't, growing up, we didn't have a lot. I didn't go to the movies as a kid. I didn't have, a lot of that, but those books were my entrance into a big budget world of action movies where by reading them you could cast whoever you wanted. You had an unlimited budget, and it really left an impact on me, so to speak.
Yeah, and um, oh, sorry, I blanked. Oh, I was
Yeah.
gonna mention that in writing that, like approaching action in a no a novel novella form, like what makes a good action scene on paper? As
It's interesting because it is very visual. It's very, very visual. To you're not describing characters' emotional states or anything metaphysical. A good action novel needs to have a level of physicality, and that really needs to come from your descriptions of the scene, from the set dressing you use. It's very different from other writing. Like you can write a crime novel and it can be really internal. You can write a horror novel and it can be crawling and creeping. But with anything that has a level of action, whether or not anyone dies in it or gets killed, or
yeah,
I mean, yep, I assume we watched MacGyver. MacGyver
yeah,
didn't have
yeah,
to kill anybody, but there was always a level of physicality, of danger, and it was visual. And in book form, the best action novels like those written, I'm reading a penetrator novel by Mark Roberts right now. It's extremely visceral, visual. He describes things like a character's Schilt's tall boy getting shot as he's getting gunned down, and there's beer and blood spraying everywhere. It it has to have some level of that. And it also needs to be paced quickly because again, you don't want to get wrapped up in an action scene that drags forever. You don't want a car chase that goes on, and you're turning the pages wondering, was this going to end
yeah.
today?
You can't do a play by moment by moment, second by second play by play of the fight.
No, no. I mean, you've got to hit the highlights. It's a highlight reel, like in sports, or hockey. Yeah, it's a sport I actually do watch. You're just getting the highlights, and that's kind of what you're doing with an action novel. And the one thing that really helped me was finding a format to get to 50,000 words per novella. Basically, if I did 15 chapters around 3,000 to 3,500 on average words, I was going to hit my mark with 15 chapters, and you could kind of pace it to have the usual story arc, uh, with beginning, your middle, to build up to the tension before the end, and all of that. And it works really effectively for myself.
Okay, so you really take the planning of not the pantser approach, like the planning, the
No,
mapping it
not at
out.
all. No.
Oh,
I'm totally pantsing it. The only planning I have is that each chapter is going to have a certain amount of words,
okay.
and I need to get to a certain point. I do not plot worth a crap. I, I, I can't figure out how to do that and be interested in what I'm writing. Because at some point I'm going to be writing my story and I'm going to be like, oh, okay, so this started out about hijackings, but now we're in Mexico and we've been captured by a Mexican general and he has a pet tiger. This is actually happening in the book I'm writing,
Love
This
that.
Gringo Kills.
Yeah,
So,
guys, for me, like I kind of have to do both. Like I have to write down a plot, like outline, because otherwise the blank page just intimidates me. So it's like I
mm,
have that, but then I'll just alter it and change it or throw it out. But for some reason I
so
have to see
it's
the
a loose
scene
guideline. It's a
breakdown.
skeleton almost, right?
Yeah, yeah. Like I gotta have
Okay.
that to move forward.
I'd probably do better in life if I had more of those skeletons in my own writing. But the nice thing for what I do is because I'm writing that kind of cheap thriller fiction, the sort of stuff that leisure books or manor books would have published back in the 70s and 80s, I don't really have to agonize too hardly about really hyper detailed plots or anything. I can just be like, this character, this bad guy's not interesting anymore. He's dead now. We got this guy instead. And so far, at least, it's worked out in my favor. I mean,
Yeah, you
I'm
can.
I'm finishing up the ninth Frenzy novel, which is pretty good. I'm trying to pace it so I publish two of those a year, plus assorted other things to kind of uh, get a year's worth of publishing out of me.
Yeah, I'm always impressed when people can do like, more than one project in a year. I feel like I work agonizingly slow. So it's like I'm gonna have two books a year. It's like I'll have one book in 2 years if I'm lucky.
Well, but you know, the thing of it is, and people, I've heard some people, I mean, I've met some authors who have an absurdly high publication rate. I've met some that have a very low publication rate. But the thing is, to me, in the end, it doesn't matter because if a reader finds your work, say in 5, 10 years, 70 years, 80 years when we're dead, whatever, I don't know.
That's what I tell myself is gonna happen. It's like
Yeah,
wait, no one's reading it
they'll
now.
be
They're
like,
gonna
oh
read it
my
when I'm
God,
dead.
that's right. They'll be like, I've got all these books by this person. They won't care how long it took them to come out. They've got books to read.
Yeah, there we go. That's how I'm gonna look at it from now on. It's like it's all gonna pay
Absolutely.
off when I'm dead.
That exactly. When some unscrupulous publisher buys the rights to all your life's work for a pittance, puts them out there and makes a mint, your name is going to be famous. People will go to the cemetery to find your gravestone. That's how
See,
famous you'll end up being.
that's
It's the
I
dream.
don't ask for much. Um, um, well, speaking of like, you mentioned you're gonna be the only, action author at ZervCon. Have you done a lot of cons? Like this will be the first one I've
No,
done. So like
this is
none?
this is the first for me. I'm quite nervous. I'm quite excited, and I'm probably overbuying product.
Yeah, I asked somebody like, well, how much should I bring? And they're like, I don't, the general answer was if you don't order it, if you order too much or order too little, it just depends on the con. Like you may sell out at one and the next one, may sell a book if you're like, you just never know. Roll the dice.
Yep, but I'd rather make sure, just in case, I've got enough of that, so I don't end up running out and going, oh yeah, that one that looks neat. You can't have that one. I don't have any more.
Yeah.
That,
Running
that's
low
that's an
here.
awkward thing to say. I mean, I work
Um,
in retail. I know what an empty peg looks like. It's not pretty.
oh, retail. Um, oh, you talked about that you do your publishing under Joe Nelson, but then you do your writing under RJ Calder. Like, um, what have you found is like beneficial about going the pen name route for your work?
It's really liberating. You don't have, at least when I'm doing it, I don't have to worry. I mean, I recently, the frenzy before this last one, the eighth frenzy that I finished, I had a scene in it that is probably and I still don't know if I'm going to keep it in when I get to the editing process. It is probably the most extreme scene I've written. And the whole time I'm writing, I'm like, oh my God, I can't do this. But Robert James Calder could. He could do it without mercy. And it frees me up from thinking of what people are going to think about me and what they're going to think about this fictitious lunatic at a typewriter. Because, of course, he writes it all on a typewriter and sends me the pages loose leaf
Mhm.
naturally. Um, it's part of the act, maybe, but it makes
Yeah,
it a lot more convenient and bearable to not have to think about what other people would perceive.
Yeah, kind of helps with that thing that Joe Lansdale always says, you write like everyone you know is dead. Like you're
Exactly. Exactly. The problem is they aren't. They're still alive.
yeah.
So I do have to be a little cautious on some of that.
I mean I
But
can see that because like I know like anything I write, my parents are gonna pick it up, my in-laws are gonna pick it up, and they will actually read it. So like there are times where I'm writing stuff and I'm just like oh, I can picture them reading it, and I'm just like hitting the backspace. Like, no, this is too far. So
so,
may
oh, not getting into heavy spoiler territory, but there's a scene in the first Frenzy novel, the Mafia Massacre, that sets John Frenzy, mafia enforcer, on the path against his mafia overlords. And the scene, it's not really a spoiler. I mean, it's on the back of the cover copy. His neighbor gets killed by a couple of hitmen hired by this capo that she had a kid with, because she's trying to blackmail him into paying child support and yada yada yada. Well, um, her in the scene, not only is she killed, but so is her 4-year old son. And my mother bought a copy of the Mafia Massacre. She read that, and her comment to me was, "I thought he was going to end up in an orphanage. You didn't have to kill him." Oops.
it's what I'm writing. Like, you should get her a Bo Johnson book. Like that's like
I have not
I
actually
know I
read
went
those
too
yet.
far, but you'll enjoy this.
I've got his on my TBR pile. It's
Yeah,
going to be
it's
a minute.
I've been reading kids like that's what I was realizing was I haven't read a lot of action, so I definitely got to pick up, you know, RJ Calder. But this ones I have read like Johnson and Todd Moore's like how violent you can, how creatively the kills can be, you know, even compared to horror, like what I'm used to. Like sometimes it can go like a level beyond like what horror does. And it's always impressive.
It's well, if you think about it, all the best action movies have to dispatch the villain in some dramatic fashion. It's like
Yeah.
watching The Long Kiss Goodnight. I mean, yeah, he did die screaming in a giant fuel tanker explosion, things like that. And so, yeah, you're. But in a way, there is a similarity between good action writing and good horror writing. The difference being what the violence is intended to evoke for an emotion.
Yeah.
And I'm no psychologist. That's maybe concerning, but maybe
Yeah, I guess
very
like in horror,
concerning.
like, the kills are they're creative and they're horrifying and creepy and stuff like that. But then in action, there's almost like a release to it. Like finally, like
Ex-
these guys don't get this in they deserve in real life, but here they do.
yeah, kind of exactly. And that's the thing. A lot of people think I'm very, very based. If they were just going based on the books I write, that I am a very angry person, and I'm not really, because it's just like most horror writers, like splatterpunk writers. Most have probably not killed and eaten anyone.
Yeah.
And it's just a form of fiction, a form of release, and for me, it's always been like the action movies. And by getting to write my own action movies, because I wanted years ago to get into filmmaking, I a whole different story there, a whole different nightmare. But books are the best of both worlds because I can cast it in my head. I have an unlimited budget, and nobody is going to say you probably shouldn't do that, or at least in the realm of self-publishing.
No studio notes. No one coming in. You
Exactly.
got to change this. You got to change that. We need.
Exactly. And that's one thing I've also taken, when I've edited the two Lash novels that we published, one Lash to Kill and the just released King of the Prowlers. I try to edit with a very light hand, because if I didn't like it already, why would I even consider publishing it? Especially since I'm a itty bitty
Yeah.
little, leaf on a tree. And so it's just very light stuff. But so in terms of, so you say that this is ZervCon's going to be your first convention.
Mhm.
Um, it's going to be a little bit of a travel for you. It's pretty close for me.
Oh
Um,
yeah. I have a
This is.
I have a 30-hour drive.
I was just gonna ask how long you've got to go. That's gonna be a bit of a trip. Now, and you're driving the whole way.
Yeah. Because I didn't know about like, you know, what do I do with all the do I ship the books like ahead of me? Like what do I do? So I was like, I'll just drive it. And I kind of map out
Yeah.
weird stuff to see along the way. Like I can stop and look at. Like I'll go through uh, oh, what's her face that, killed her parents in New York.
Oh, okay.
Lizzie Borden, sorry,
Uh,
Lizzie Borden.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I go by her house. Like I'll go really close to the Kurt Vonnegut Museum. So it's like I've got little things I can stop to see, make a memorable trip.
That's cool. That's cool. I
That's
uh, I think it's gonna be a very fun time. It's got a swell group of people going, so that's also going to be exciting.
agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to it. Um, well, awesome. I think this has been a great, for my second interview. I think it's gone very well. Like,
Yeah,
I think it's
you've done a
it's gone better than the
fantastic job.
last one. Robert really carried me in the last one, and I appreciate that.
No, hey, you've done a fantastic job. You've done well. Hey, my first interview, your second. So
Okay, there we go. Yeah. Um,
yeah, you've done good on that. Well, and I've appreciated you taking the time out of your busy schedule to sit down and have a chat.
Absolutely. And if people watch this on YouTube, go pick up, go Point of Impact Publishing and see what they got. Get some action novels. You need it in your life.
www.pointofimpactbooks.com. Get you
Boom.
to everything you need. Elford, it's been a pleasure.
Awesome. Agreed. And I don't think I'll end it right